shit dialogue that is about as interesting and as nuanced as a dildo to the face. This is what I keep reading and what I keep hearing every time I watch something about Rings of Power or every time I read something about Rings of Power. And because of the success of my last video, which I'd like to say thank you very much for, I got asked in the comment section to sort of explore my views a little bit more, which is what I'm going to do. And it's the first time I've been asked to do anything in the comment section, so thanks very much for that. So in this video, I'm going to be trying to drill down a little bit into the bad dialogue that everyone keeps talking about, that all the reviews talk about, and take a few examples of something that I think really encapsulates just the fucking chef's kiss of the terrible dialogue in this show. And at the root of what I'm going to talk about in this video is the show's incessant need to push racial tensions throughout the show between elves, men, dwarves, mostly between elves and men. I'm sure you've noticed it. It is not present anywhere near to the same extent in Tolkien's works as it is in this show. I mean, Peter Jackson took liberties, I think, when he sort of like portrayed Gimli and Legolas's relationships, and you know the showrunners of the Rings of Power have fucking taken that and have ran with it. In fact, they've more than ran with it. They have fucking gone on a plane and gone to the other side of the world with it. But what do I mean by that? What do I mean by like the incessant need to push racial tensions? Well, all throughout this show, conflict is started or conflict is heightened, or you know that's what the writers are trying to do anyway, by the injection of some kind of racial tension, some kind of racial conflict, and it's mostly between the elves and the men in this show. Before I really get into it, I just want to point out that my personal reading of Tolkien's work when it came to the elves was that he wrote the elves as kind of like biblical hero characters in Middle-earth and in Valinor. You know, when you read it, people know that Tolkien was a die-hard theist. He was a very theistic person. He was very religious. He took his faith very seriously, and there are theist themes all throughout Lord of the Rings and theistic references, right? We know this. And when he writes about these elves, especially, you know, the older elves, it comes across like if you pick up like Genesis or one of the earlier books in the Bible, and they talk about all of these biblical heroes from way back when who just were so much closer to gods than everyone else, and they had all of these longer lives and did all these heroic deeds that you know people who read the Bible still read about today. I got the impression that he wanted to write the elves like the ancient heroes in the Bible, and in the Lord of the Rings lore, the elves are these half angelic, immortal, connected to the earth, almost perfect beings that everybody reveres. The men and the hobbits and even the dwarves. I mean, like I said, Peter Jackson took liberties with the relationship between the dwarfs and the elves, I think. But everyone in Middle-earth reveres the dwarfs, and people just want to be like them. And that was actually, spoiler alert for the show, although maybe not spoiler alert if they've just decided to, you know, fucking throw out the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion altogether. The fall of Numenor, the island, and the people on it, the men on it, was because they wanted to be like the elves so badly that they tried to find immortality. That it was jealousy that drove them to it, not like this hatred of them, like they'd done them wrong or they'd done them dirty. I mean, they were jealous that the elves were immortal and that they had immortality, and that they were, you know, perceived as being somehow more perfect beings. But there's a strong relationship between the Númenóreans and the elves in the books, in the Silmarillion stories, and that actually led to their downfall. But now that I've done that, I just wanted to say that straight up in front to set the stage, that the Rings of Power's depiction of the relationships between elves and other people in the world of Middle-earth in Middle-earth and Valinor is wrong. I don't think it's an accurate representation of what Tolkien wrote in his books. Tolkien wrote quite positive relationships between elves and everyone. I'll just start out by reading this Amazon customer review. I mean, I've been reading these all day. I quite like reading these, to be honest. But terrible acting, pathetic dialogue worthy of angsty teenagers, absolutely boring scenarios, complete drag. Like, all you have to do is come in Amazon and put the word dialogue in, and you'll just see just reams and reams of critique about the dialogue in the show. I've heard people around me use the word dialogue, and I've never heard them use that word before. That is the positive impact that this show's having on society at the minute. People are really elevating their critiques of the shows that they're watching, which I'm a fan of. I'm here for. Same again, straight here. Wooden acting, lack of any content storyline, and painright, cringe-worthy dialogue, courtesy of lazy writing, full of hollow, meaningless metaphors using vain attempts to sound profound and Tolkien-esque. Okay, so we've got these reviews. We know people don't like the dialogue. I think the forced racial tension in the dialogue is a good way. Is a good example to bring up when people talk about poor dialogue, and by that I mean the use of the word elf. Even just the way the word elf is used, right? The elves are just called elf as a derogatory term all over the fucking show. The writers have clearly decided that they're going to use the word elf as a shortcut to inject racial tension into the story. You get, you get people in bars being like, "Oh, fuck off, elf," and then you get, you get the Queen in one of the more recent episodes. When Gladriel asks to see her father, she's like, "You never mind, elf," and it's just so lazy, and it's such a contrived way of making a situation have more friction between the characters. They've just thought, racism, that exists, we'll just have people in the show call each other by their races, dwarf, man, elf, and I think that is a perfect example of this kind of cringeworthy dialogue, courtesy of lazy writing, that this person and many other people like this person have noticed in the show. And I find it really jarring when it comes out as well. Whenever you hear it, it's just so unnecessary, and it's not even backed up by anything. The show hasn't even done much at all to explain why there's this level of animosity. As far as you could see in the show, there seems to be quite placid relationships between everyone. I mean, all Gladriel does at one point is get on a fucking boat, and she's like, "Oh, elf," and then she goes to Numenor. She goes to Numenor, and that's all they've got to say as well. But it's just so tame. Where is it coming from? There's some, obviously, if you've read the Silmarillion and kind of mega fans, I guess, who've read the Silmarillion would know that they're trying to suggest that there's people around the world had sided with Sauron in the past, and therefore have anti-elf sentiment left over from that. But that just doesn't go anywhere near to get into the level of racial tension that the show's trying to put in here. It isn't justified, I don't think. And a lot of it's just so random from a lot of characters. Like, okay, so you've got these people in Mordor, and those kind of areas. You're like, okay, well, yeah, I guess they've got some affinity to Sauron. They kind of want him back. I guess maybe they wouldn't like elves. But why is everyone else? It's just like at this point, the Numenorians, I mean, they were literally given that island for helping the elves, and now they're all like, nah, fuck them. Even though in the books they say, in Silmarillion in particular, they say that gifts were brought over from Valinor and that the elves were over there all the time. So the Numenorians don't have at this point in the story, don't have a real reason for the level of animosity that we're seeing at all. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think the issue can be seen just as clearly when, derogatory terms other than the word elf are used. I mean, we hear Daggeria, Knifear. I can just imagine someone sat in some closed-door writer's room coming, what are we going to call them? I know, we'll call them Daggeria. Ooh. Yeah. It's just so childish, and it just feels lazy. Like, that's a very, very lazy slur, and I am currently in the process of rereading The Lord of the Rings, but in my past readings of The Lord of the Rings, I'm fairly confident Daggeria was not used like this sort of flippant disregard of the elves, and sort of they are literally the most beautiful people in Tolkien's world. They shine like starlight when they walk. They are holy beings. Why would you just be like, fucking, his ears are shit? Like what? Like, it's just so out of place. I mean, to imagine a character in Middle Earth saying that. Everyone holds the elves in such reverence that it's really jarring as someone who's read the books to come on and watch it, and then to just see this ideology just shoehorned in there. But the greatest thing of it is that it's not even done very well. It's not even like you're like, oh, I really feel the hatred there. I really feel it. That person hates elves. You're like, all right, okay. And what's gonna become of this tension? Nothing. The characters just bicker. Hey, and that bickering is actually a something that I think came up in someone else's review. Here we go. Chad C. We know this guy's got something important to say. Absolutely terrible, incoherent, childish. Right, I was saying childish. Like dagger ear, just constantly going elf. It does feel childish. Most of the characters are unlikable, toxic, and do nothing but argue. Exactly, like all of this. Even if you were to be really invested in all this racial tension, you're like, oh, these Numenorians, they don't like these elves at all. What's the outcome? Like, they just disagree. They're just like, oh, I don't like you. All right, okay. Several episodes in, and I'm not sure what the point is. Every trope imaginable exists here without dialogue, whether dialogue or action. Yep, trope again. We've got the racial friction trope coming out. Oh, what is he? He's an elf. Oh, we'll just have, anytime anyone interacts with them, we'll just have them call him an elf, just so people know that there's some fucking sweet racial tension in here. Ugh. Absolutely terrible. It's actually funny. I found this post on Reddit about the word dagger ears. Shout out to the big duo. I found this really interesting because I reflected on my previous readings of Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion. I was like, I can't remember them being any ear-related insults toward the elves. And then I read this guy's post, guy or girl, I mean, I don't know. I read this person's post, and they talked about how there was a previous rumor going around a while ago that Amazon was working on a Dragon Age TV show, and I didn't know this. I wasn't plugged into the the comings and goings of Amazon at the time. But dagger ears, this person says, was in Dragon Age. It was like one of the main slurs in Dragon Age. And I mean, I played the first 3 Dragon Age, but it was a while, the first 3 Dragon Age games. But I don't remember this. But I do find this really interesting. This person basically goes on to say that this show's dialogue and like some of the content has basically just been carbon copied. I have some points to back this up. First, the elves being the targets of racism. That's never been a thing in Tolkien's works, but is a major theme in Dragon Age. I said it wasn't in Tolkien's works. In fact, they use the slur knife ears because it's from Dragon Age, is what this person said. Can't find it used anywhere else. I actually can remember, I don't know if it's the word knife ears, but I actually remember in The Witcher 3 game, the elves, the Scoia'tael, they are actually subject to, there's a lot of racial tension. They are subject to a lot of poor treatment based on racial reasons in the Witcher 3 games. And words like, I'm pretty sure words like pointy ears, I don't know if like knife ears in particular, but there are those kind of words thrown around in The Witcher 3. But in The Witcher 3, I feel like when I played it, it doesn't feel childish because, you know, as Chad C says, most of the characters are likable, toxic, and do nothing but argue. So they just bicker, and that's like the conclusion of whatever racial tension's there. But in The Witcher, I mean, people literally get burned at the stake, and there's genocides, and people are being hunted en masse by. Spoiler for The Witcher 3, if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't played it, I should say, because the show did lighten down the game a little bit, but the kind of tension was there in The Witcher 3 when you went throughout the games, because people were literally getting fucking butchered everywhere. And so when someone said something like that, you were like, oh, I might be about to take on a contract or go on a quest here that's going to involve potentially stopping some genocide or stopping some murder based on this kind of thing. I mean, again, another spoiler, but you know, when you go into Novigrad for the first time in Witcher 3, and the witches who everyone's just like, witch, so it's fairly standard. You know, that's like fairly standard dialogue, but it's poignant because you go in there and they're setting fire to them all in pyres in the middle of the street, and everyone's cheering. So you're like, oh, right, okay, yeah, there's actual tension here, and there's some actual development going on here, I see. And so that's why it works in in The Witcher, which when I first heard this, one of my thoughts was that sounds like The Witcher, but it's just not done in the same ways as The Witcher. Tolkien didn't create a world in the same way that the Witcher world plays out, and I just don't think it belongs personally. And then I've got this final article here that I think kind of sums up what I'm saying quite nicely. The Rings of Power is caught between real-world politics and Fantasyland dialogue. This is from The Telegraph. I mean, it only got 3 stars, but I think that's a pretty good summary title, to be honest. And if we go just to the very end, to the last paragraph. But the problem with crafting realistic political situations is that they need to be occupied by real people with conflicting emotions and motivations. The Rings of Power's commitment to mannered, high fantasy dialogue makes the task much more difficult. I completely agree. They've chosen very true to life, quite dark themes. And Lord of the Rings has some dark themes, but I mean, is it a story that's set from that's set up from top to bottom to be able to deal with the kind of like racial tensions that they're going for here? I just don't think it is. I just don't think it is. The Tolkien has imparted, holiness. He's imparted immortality and reverence of everyone around them into the elves, and it just feels like a very jarring experience. And that's it for this video. I do not like how often the word elf is used as a shortcut to inject some conflict. Just to inject some conflict. I don't like it. It takes me out of the story. On the odd occasion that I feel myself getting involved with the show, someone will just call someone an elf, and I'll be like, oh, fucking hell. Honestly, it is about as subtle as a dildo to the face. And it is what it is.